Thank you, Chair. Thank you all very much for your time this morning and for your submissions. I wanted to start with UTS. Thank you for the work that you're doing in this area and your submission. You've described the breadth of these automation provisions as unprecedented in Australian law, and said that the bill allows the minister to automate any decision made in the NDIS, including decisions that require discretion. The robodebt Royal Commission recommendations have come up a number of times in this inquiry so far, and you said that the Royal Commission made warnings about the automation of discretion. I was wondering if you could give us an example of a discretionary decision that could be made by ADM following the passage of this bill, and what the risks would be of making that decision in an automated way.
Thank you, Senator. Subject to the Minister's determination, almost any major decision that affects individuals under the NDIS could be made in an automated way. And the point that we are particularly concerned about there is that every individual has their own needs. And we know that particularly with disability, that to reduce someone to their kind of diagnosis or their particular kind of impairments is not just dehumanising, it is also just a recipe for inaccuracy and for error. In other words, one person who may have a neurodiversity diagnosis may have a particular set of needs, and another person will have very different needs. And I think one of the ways in which the NDIS has been a beacon of light, not just within Australia but in other parts of the world, is that it is capable of making individualised decisions. If, by contrast, you give to a machine the task of exercising discretion, then what you're much more likely to do to make that possible is you basically treat people as categories or sort of subgroups. And that is much more likely to mean that you're not fair and you don't provide for people's individual needs. So in addition to the robodebt Royal Commission, you've had numerous oversight bodies, including my former position as Human Rights Commissioner, but also the Commonwealth Ombudsman, the New South Wales Ombudsman. They've all sounded the alarm about this sort of automation of discretion.
And so should the Senate be more concerned about individual errors or the possibility of producing harmful decisions at scale, given it's going to be the same tool used?
Look, I think that the latter concern is a really serious one. By treating people in categories and making decisions automatically, the risk that introduces is that you make a lot of errors very, very quickly. And we saw that with robodebt. So what's the response to that? Let me be very clear. We are not saying that all forms of automation are inappropriate. There are some forms of automation, particularly if what you're really doing is a calculation. So as we say in our submission, if you've got some complex, calculation, you're adding up a series of numbers, don't trust a human like me to do that. Of course, that should be done in an automatic way. If you're determining whether someone is on a particular database, that's something that, again, is suitable for automation. But if what you're really trying to do is weigh up a number of factors, generally that is much harder to do by automation. So what I think really well-balanced governments do is that they say, okay, there are some types of decision that are appropriate for automation and they should be kind of prioritised. And then there are other decisions that need to be made by humans, or even parts of decisions that need to be made by humans. And that is what the bill fails to do now, but it should be amended to do.
One of the things I'm really concerned about is that the government, just like they say with the aged care integrated assessment tool, they say, well, humans will remain involved. And it seems to me, and you've made the point in your submission, that human involvement only provides meaningful oversight if the person has the authority and practical ability to depart from or override a computer-generated outcome. And so with this bill and with the powers that are being handed to the minister, what would genuine human oversight look like, and how does that compare with the model being contemplated in this bill as it is currently written?
Yeah, look, I might start answering that question and then hand over to my colleague. The first point I would make is that the explanatory memorandum emphasises the expectation that humans will still exercise oversight in various different ways over decision-making in the NDIS. And while that is somewhat heartening, it is not reflected in the bill itself. And so there are numerous ways in which the explanatory memorandum and the most recent addendum to this explanatory memorandum talks about additional accountability safeguards, but they're just simply not reflected in the bill itself. I might hand to my colleague to talk about some of the specific ones that we're interested in.
Yeah, so probably one of the key issues is that only the CEO can substitute incorrect decisions made by automated systems, and that's a non-delegable power. So essentially that means that at the staff level, they will not be able to exercise genuine discretion when a decision is made. And that's obviously where it's important, because if that discretion is not exercised at that first level, you are going to experience harm, and then you will have to go and seek review to get that redressed. And that's where the second problem comes in, which is there is, for the automated decisions under the bill, there is not that access to internal review. So ordinarily, when you have a decision made against that adversely affects you, you can go seek a review by a more senior officer in the department. That's what ordinarily happens. For automated decisions, this will not apply. And it's kind of worth making the point that automated decisions have the exact same impact as human-made decisions on people's human rights, and they have the exact same harms. So you need to ensure that the same standard applies to decisions, whether they're made automatically or whether they're made by a human being, and that's what we've recommended in our submission.
Thank you. One of the pieces of evidence that we heard yesterday was that when these provisions are combined with the expanded debt-raising powers in the bill, there may be scope for more debts to be raised through ADM, with limited rights to challenge those debts. And without suggesting that the schemes are identical, does this combination of automated decision-making, raising debts, very limited ability to actually challenge those decisions, reproduce some of the central risk factors exposed by robodebt?
The short answer, Senator, is yes. The explanatory memorandum says that merits review is not reduced by this bill, and we disagree with that statement. And the reason for that is a little bit complicated. That is that whenever an automated decision is made, the bill says that it is taken to be a decision of the CEO. And what that means is that there is no one who is at the same level as the CEO, there is no one more senior than the CEO, so there is no capacity to get internal review of an automated decision like the sorts of decision you're talking about. And it pains me to say this as a lawyer, but for just the practical reality is that most Australians will never be able to afford a lawyer to challenge a decision in a tribunal or a court. And so internal review, that's just a simple mechanism of being able to go to a more senior officer within the agency to have another look at your decision. That is so important. So if you take that away, the risks are incredibly high. Now, the government's response to this is that the CEO of the NDIA can step in and substitute a decision, but that is not merits review. That's a little bit like the system we have in our Migration Act, where the minister has what's sometimes referred to as godlike powers, and you can't compel the minister to even look at a visa decision, but they can if they choose to step in. And so I think it's really important. We think it's really important that you have just conventional merits review for automated decisions rather than reducing that review.
Thank you. Just finally, because I assume I'm coming up on time, looking at the Human Technology Institute's website, you describe the Institute as at the forefront of driving the regulatory, governance and technical change needed to allow the benefits of digital technologies to be delivered in a way that uplifts our communities and upholds human rights. This is obviously a huge question for the Parliament and something that we are grappling with. I was wondering if you could take the committee through the amendments you consider essential to this bill to actually ensure that we're doing that, we're using technology in a responsible way to speed up things that can be sped up and automated, but actually ensuring that we put humans at the centre and we maintain that oversight.
I'll be very brief. That's a big question, and I'd be happy for my colleagues and myself to expand on this in a private session or even with you or other senators. In short, it's the following. The first is any determination about automating a class of decisions, that should be made by our Parliament, not by a minister. Secondly, when a decision is made using automation, it must be accountable. That means that people must get, anyone affected by a decision that's made using automation should be given reasons and should be given a clear and accessible pathway to challenge that decision if they think it is incorrect or unfair. Thirdly, there needs to be particular attention paid to things that automation does not tend to do well. So that's why we've particularly focused on the concern about automation of discretion. And so government should be very wary about automating discretion, and when it does do so, it needs to put in place additional super-added protections. I'll leave off there, but our recommendation 7 kind of outlines in a bit more detail what we think is the basic protections needed for ADM.